Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the top 5 most maddening campaigns to play in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. These are not necessarily difficult campaigns, though they certainly can be, but you can also avoid that. These are not necessarily bad legendary lords, though some of them do have design issues. No, it's just a specific combination of faction effects or lord effects or racial design that does create a fairly frustrating combination to actually deal with within the context of an Immortal Empires campaign. And at number 5, it is Alarielle the Radiant. Now, Alarielle is a very powerful legendary lord. The High Elves are a very powerful race. And Alarielle's benefits in terms of her skill line, specifically tradition dictates for control in all provinces, construction cost in a local province, handmaiden recruitment capacity, Sisters of Avalorn benefits, those are all very strong, powerful benefits. But what is the issue? Well, the fundamental issue, beyond various High Elven problems, comes down to the Defender of Ulthuan mechanic. So with the Defender of Ulthuan, you're starting your campaign with a plus 18% construction cost for all buildings. Now, this is something that will easily be resolved. You take the Phoenix Gate, Tyrion takes the Shrine of Assyrian, that construction cost goes down. But you're always in a situation in this campaign, especially early on, where it's very easy to go from a positive to a negative. You start in the negative, you can get positive if all of Ulthuan is under High Elven control, but because of factions like Belegar or Noctilus or even Morathi, you may find yourself in a situation where it's very, very easy to turn from positive to negative. In fact, I would dare say this system was probably the idea behind the Harmony system, because it kind of works in a similar way, or the pre-patch Harmony system for Cathay, where you have a faction-wide effect that is very easy to turn positive, but it's also very easy to turn it negative. Another thing about this system is that it's also bugged, in the sense that getting 100% positive, which should be doable, ends up being a difficult affair within the context of a campaign. Certainly Alarielle has a great deal of effects, but her campaign is, well, a lot of pain and suffering, or a lot of frustration. Not because she's hard, I emphasize that. There's someone like Alarielle who has a handmaiden benefit in her campaign, plus 2 hero capacity for handmaidens, who can recruit them in every single province. And these are replenishment heroes that are ridiculously good. As far as heroes go in a campaign, these are probably the strongest heroes in Immortal Empires, on a campaign side of things. But why is that? Well, you get Diplomat of the Everqueen. You might lose some combat benefits, to be sure, but you get Diplomat of the Everqueen. This gives you 2 diplomatic relations with High Elves, 2 diplomatic relations with all factions, 5% income from trade tariffs, which this, by the way, is the equivalent of a building that also gives you income from trade tariffs, and discrete influence per turn. So basically every kind of issue that High Elves have in their campaigns, or everything that High Elves need to be successful, getting diplomatic relations with factions to get more trading partners, increasing the trade income for trade tariffs, Alarielle provides that with these handmaidens. She has more handmaidens than everyone else. Not just because she can recruit 5 of them much earlier on than any other High Elf could even dream of recruiting a single handmaiden, but beyond the fact that she can get 5 of them faction-wide just through her faction effects or lord effects, these handmaidens also give you Favored of Isha, plus 1 control in all provinces, even if you don't get Diplomat of the Everqueen and go for combat benefits. Why is that so important? Well, the High Elf economy is based on gaining a high level of control in your provinces. Now, this is not necessarily a problem in High Elven campaigns, especially later on, but early on it can be. But you being able to get 5 heroes, each of which gives you 1 control, is a fairly substantial benefit. But it's not just 5 heroes, it's more of these handmaidens than anyone else combined, even, because you can get these at tier 3. And that means that Alarielle can just play her campaign and pump out the handmaiden doom stacks in her campaign long before anyone can even dream of that, because she can gain them through minor settlements, whereas in other High Elven campaigns, you can only gain them from major settlements. So the power is there, but the Defender of Ulthuan just is a frustrating system. To be certain, Alarielle is really, really strong as a legendary lord, but I think there's a reason why Queen of the Crown is one of the least popular DLCs for Warhammer 3. Like, there were community polls or Reddit polls on the DLCs, and this one came out in one of the worst positions for the game. And there's a reason behind that. Well, there's also Hellebron. Just a lot of people don't like this DLC. They don't like the characters. They don't like the mechanics of this DLC. Certainly, there is a good amount of frustration to go around. At number 4, we have Grand Hierophant Khatep of the Tomb Kings. Now, the Tomb Kings do certainly have a lot of issues in their campaigns, especially in terms of getting army capacity. But that is more of an issue for Cetra, especially, and to a lesser extent Khalida. Arkhan starts with an extra army, so that's not really a problem for him. Khatep doesn't start with an extra army, but because of his starting position, funnily enough, he actually plays one of the most safe and secure campaigns over here in this location, because Grombrindal is going to end up fighting Malekith, and most likely Valkia. The Sisters of Twilight are not a very aggressive faction against a lot of people. Estankia is going to deal with Moravi. So you're surrounded by legendary lords in a lot of ways, but none of them are going to bother you. So you might think, oh, this is a very easy, casual campaign. In a lot of ways, it is. The frustration, the maddening aspect of this campaign comes down to what you have to do in order to win the campaign. So Khatep does get 2 hero capacity for Lich Priest, and because of the way Tomb Kings recruit heroes, well, you start with Lich Priest, you'll be able to get another one that is your replenishment. But then you look at his skill line, you get a bunch of different benefits over here through the skill line, including unit capacity for Tomb Guard, and an extra hero capacity for Lich Priest, and hero recruit rank for Lich Priest, and you also have a Casket of Souls as well. You can also recruit Lich Priests in every single province, and increase that capacity even further. So you might think, great campaign, lots of power, right? Getting magic users is fun, not having the same problems as other Tomb Kings have in terms of increasing hero capacity is fun, so on and so forth. That is all well and good, but what drives you nuts in this campaign, well, there's 2 things. One is obviously the Books of Nagash system, which is, let's just say the Books of Nagash is a miserable system to deal with. I've talked about it in other videos, but yes, it is just a very frustrating system, because one of the key elements about Tomb Kings, one of the things that actually makes them tick, is their ability of getting diplomatic vassalizations. And they can do this very, very well, and have a lot of flexibility and diplomacy in their campaign. Until you realize you cannot gain the Books of Nagash through any kind of diplomacy. That alone drives you pretty crazy in every single Tomb King campaign. The worst part about all of this in this campaign, if you're playing Khatep and you're looking to accomplish not your short campaign victory condition, though I gotta tell you, awakening all 4 legions of legend from the Mortuary Cult is not really gonna be a great thing to do, because, one, they're not really that worth it. I mean, like the Necropolis Knights, sure, you know, you can argue about Nekhakarov, horsemen or carrions, like kind of regiment of renown. No, absolutely freaking not. That is certainly not really worth it. A lot of these are not really worth it. The Mortuary Cult system in itself does absolutely need an overhaul and rebalancing. So does the Forge of the Dwarves. But regardless of that situation in this campaign, the thing that really drives you up the wall is if you are looking to try and do your long campaign victory condition, enjoy that situation. Short campaign, not really a problem, but that's counterbalanced with the fact that you have the Books of Nagash system, which forces you to fight factions you otherwise would ally, or at the very least, you know, make deals with. Like, having to go over here to beat out Mazdamundi to take a book, that is not a great mechanic, nor is it being forced to fight more with Morathi for territory you don't want. Furthermore, even though you literally start in Nagarond, or Western Nagarond, and you're surrounded by frozen climate, a lot of the climate around you isn't horrible, but it isn't suitable climate. That is another problem, and so you end up being limited by the climate. But to win your long campaign victory condition, you have to go all the way to Khemri, fight Cetra, for instance. Let's assume Cetra survives, he builds an empire over here. You can't ally Cetra. You can't confederate Cetra. The only thing you can do in a Khatep campaign is fight Cetra, destroy Cetra, conquer his territory, and build the pyramids over here in order to win your long campaign victory condition. That is as frustrating as it does sound. It ruins the lore of this character, who was extremely loyal to Cetra in the actual lore. Like, Khatep actually brought Cetra back. Extremely loyal to Cetra. The fact that that is your only way to win a long campaign is also exceptionally frustrating. I think Tomb Kings do need some level of confederation. I think the only one who shouldn't be able to confederate would be Archon, because of his campaign situation. That makes sense. But in a Khatep campaign, Khalida campaign, Cetra campaign, it should be doable, but it's not. It is especially bad with Khatep if you do know his lore, his relationship with Cetra. Khalida having to beat up Cetra to win, that's a different discussion, considering Khalida's own lore in a lot of ways. And Cetra's own lore, but it's just that kind of experience, campaign problem in a nutshell. It is genuinely one of the worst campaigns to play, even though it's certainly not a horrible campaign. You are not weak. You have a Casket of Souls as a mount. You have magic easier than other people. You don't start in the Thunderdome, or rather you do start in the Thunderdome, but unlike others, you can ignore that Thunderdome. So lots of power, lots of capability, but basically a campaign that takes you from one side of the world to another in order to win it, and it's really nothing on offer in terms of actually interesting campaign mechanics. It's a sad state of affairs, and it does drive you crazy as a player. At number 3, it would be Nakai of the Lizardmen. Now, Lizardmen are one of the worst races in Warhammer 3, so you would think a campaign that ignores a lot of their problems in terms of hero capacity, research, construction times, would be much better. You'd think so, and in a lot of ways it is. In fact, it's much better than Tomb Kings. You know, this is how army capacity look, just a research tree at the top that takes 5 turns each in order to get what you want. I mean, okay, some of these things may take longer and longer, but you get the idea. Like, 5 turns to get an extra army, that is actually a much better system than what the Tomb Kings actually have available in their campaigns. But here's the problem. You still start in the jungle and all the issues that come in that jungle. You still have a lot of problems with moving freaking slow. Southeastern Cathay is not especially a great place in terms of the terrain design over here, just very, very slow to navigate. And because you only have one army, if even that, because your economy may not even support the full stack of Saurus in this army, you end up playing a very, very slow campaign. Certainly not a difficult one in Nakai's situation, though you always have that risk of if you lose Nakai's army, it's GG, well played. Though you can get replenishment quickly, you can get more heroes than others very quickly, you can get various benefits to increase your vassal power, vassal income, etc. But it's just kind of one of those campaigns where you know you're playing a legendary lord that does have a decent amount of power and isn't horrible unlike the other Lizardmen, and it's still not great. What's even worse is what happens when you confederate other legendary lords of the Lizardmen, which, by the way, this campaign does require you to go to Lestria, most likely to, you know, deal with Clan Pestilent, or you do get an army over there in Lestria. But when you confederate another legendary lord faction, which is fun, you just gain their army. And, well, armies. You don't gain their territory, not even as a vassal. And because you can't interact with settlements in a way other factions can, because it's all under the control of your vassal, you actually end up in a situation where you can't engage in diplomacy in the same way other factions do. So your diplomacy ends up being limited, which causes all kinds of issues, and your economy is not necessarily good enough to actually sustain the number of armies that you can maintain. Even though you can get army capacity from a practical standpoint, you may not necessarily have the economy to support it. So it ends up being a fairly frustrating and slow, grinding mess of a campaign experience, where if you lose this one army under Nakai, it's kind of GG, well played. Also the fact that only Nakai's army can actually recruit units. whereas others have to use global recruitment, further worsens this situation. I'm not sure what Creative Assembly was thinking when designing this campaign. To be certain, though, it is a much better situation than what we had in Warhammer 2. But I think there's a reason they decided to just throw Nakai in a corner in this particular campaign. There's a very, very good reason for that. Because if they threw him in a difficult campaign starting position, that would not go down so well for him. Though, to be honest, I think I would prefer a more difficult campaign situation. But the problem is you can't even sack settlements. You can either raise them or give them to a vassal. That is great, and you're almost always incentivized to actually give them to a vassal because of the temples of the old ones mechanic you do have. Yeah, Lizardmen need a redesign. In some ways, this is one of the better Lizardmen campaign, but even this one does end up suffering quite a bit from Lizardmen design choices. It isn't the pure misery of Mazda Mundi, but it isn't necessarily a really fun experience either. And number 2, it is Belegar Ironhammer, and honestly, this campaign is the reason I even made this video in the process. I was playing this campaign, just going over Belegar's campaign. Some people consider this campaign difficult. I don't think I would agree with that specific sentiment, really. But it is certainly an exceptionally frustrating, maddening campaign to actually play. The reason it's not hard is you start with 4 superheroes that are unbreakable, so they'll literally fight to their last breath. They might not have the armor to survive a very long time, but they do have a fairly high amount of physical resistance, so given the enemies you're actually fighting in this campaign, that isn't necessarily a big problem. You can take Skavenblight very quickly in this campaign, though I have found that taking Tylea and letting Ikeclaw fight the Tutaranessa before going to take Skavenblight might just actually be their better choice in this situation. Belegar is certainly a powerful legendary lord. He is certainly a legendary lord that has a really, really good skill line. You look at Rally the Hold, so diplomatic relations, global recruitment duration, global recruitment capacity. That is very strong. Feigns, hero capacity for Feigns, physical resistance for his Harmony, the Age of Reconquest ability. All of these things, like especially that construction cost, minus 30% for province capital settlement buildings, is very damn powerful. The faction effects, however, are what ruin it. You do get a High King Decree, sure, but having Vanguard deployment in underway battles, that's kind of very situational, especially because the way underway battles do work. Maybe if we had the ability of attacking in the underway, while being in the underway stance ourselves, maybe that would work a bit differently, just putting it out there in a campaign. But still, you do have those heroes, you have that unique building chain at Carrick 8 Peaks, but geez, this campaign does absolutely need an update. From a starting position, you might think this campaign is all about going to retake Carrick 8 Peaks, but you really don't gain much from taking Carrick 8 Peaks except like the Grand Underway Junction, which isn't even a unique building to you. And here's the thing, it's actually much better in this campaign, and I've come to this conclusion, to ignore Carrick 8 Peaks for a decent length of time. Because things can go very poorly, to be sure, in the east for Forgrim and Ungram. In this case, Ungram's the one that's on the receiving end of a lot of pain and suffering from Azag, so I'm going to have to rescue him in that situation. One way or another. Maybe I should just confederate him. Just saying. Just confederate Ungram. Okay, what the hell? Okay, forget what I just said there. We are not doing that. That's not really workable as a situation. Though there are ways to skin the cat, so to speak. We can just disband all these armies. He just had miners in this campaign, really? But you can pay attention to this kind of state of affairs and take advantage of the situation for your own benefit, really. Where you are taking advantage of the weakness or strengths that other factions do have. But really, you're much better off going for Alpha Lorem. Why is that? Well, Durfu will actually gain a significant amount of grudges in this campaign by taking the Grimhold, so he will have like 1,000 grudges. To understand how many grudges I have over here, in this campaign you could possibly get Confederation faster with other Dwarf Legendary Lords, But to understand the amount of grudges, I have 11,000 grudges. And the reason behind that is I killed Durfu, I got the Legendary Grudge for Alphalore and dealt with. Like, you might think this campaign is about retaining Karaka peaks. Yes, I am using a climate mod. I'm not holding on to the forest. Like, I sold it to others. It's not worth it. You might think that this campaign is about taking Karaka peaks, but you benefit so much from taking Alphalore and destroying Durfu, taking the Southern Grey Mountains over here from Durfu, setting up your base of operations over there, then dealing with Skaven Blight, and then just, I know, fighting pirates, seriously, fighting the various pirate factions, because you're always going to constantly struggle on money, and then uniting your armies to take Karaka peaks. So, in effect, the most interesting and difficult portion of the campaign, which is the first 30 turns, you end up being incentivized to play it with a plus 50% upkeep to your armies. And once you do take Karaka peaks, the benefits that you get faction-wide are so ridiculous that you're steamrolling the crap out of everything in the game. This campaign represents one of the fundamental problems of Warhammer 3, in the sense that you have a very difficult early game, and that's the norm. But in this one, it's not difficult as so much as it is frustrating, because you have the strongest army in the region. Like, much stronger than all of Alphalore combined, much stronger than Ikeclaw, much stronger than Scrag. And you don't have to fight all of them at once. You can pick and choose. Like, over here, I just rushed the Thalian capital and dealt the Aranissa a blow, and then let Ikeclaw finish her off, while I then invaded Alphalore and Durfu, etc. There are so many possibilities for string, but playing a campaign with a plus 50% upkeep is annoying, suffice to say. But what's even more annoying is that once you do take Karaka peaks, it becomes a cakewalk, because your economy suddenly goes up by 50%. Well, really more than that. Honestly, like, you might say it's 50%, but it kind of does end up feeling quite a bit more. You take Karaka peaks, you get the Grand Underweight Junction, you get the Great Deal of Power. Or, hell, another reason why you're not incentivized to go with Belegar to Karaka peaks is because you have a quest panel over here that grants you Vision of Karakazul, and you might confederate Karakazul and take Karaka peaks with them. If you get lucky. I didn't get lucky over here in this campaign. I actually sold Karakazul to Skarsenik and engineered a little Skaven and Greenskin war to just prevent Skarsenik from, getting out of control. But if you're fortunate enough, you might just be able to take advantage of the situation. Or I could have confederated Forgrim in this case. Like, just to look at the map over here. Forgrim has 1, 2, 3, 4 full stacks of troops. Those might bankrupt me in a single turn, but until they bankrupt me, I'm certainly going to use those armies to achieve my objectives. That's the point. You might think this is a campaign race for Karaka peaks, but there's no race for Karaka peaks. You're incentivized to ignore Karaka peaks, endure the misery of the 50% upkeep. Maybe you get lucky with Forgrim, maybe you get lucky with Karakazul. Who knows, right? In this case, I could have Forgrim got lucky, but I can't afford to confederate him because economic issues. Besides, I think it's better if I let Forgrim deal with some of these factions on his own. If he beats up Skarsenik, I can confederate him later. That's another thing. I engineered the war between Skarsenik and Forgrim, or rather, they started a war with each other. They haven't wiped each other out, but it's much better for me to deal with Skarbrand, take Albraz, and maybe Forgrim beats up Skarsenik. Maybe he doesn't. But regardless, I'll end up benefiting from the situation in quite a big way. Hell, I might even confederate Zufbar in this campaign in a couple of turns. It just gives you an idea of how frustrating this campaign is when you're relying on RG to get it done. You don't know what's going to happen. That can be fun. I'm not lying about that. But 50% upkeep, then a complete steamroll of a campaign is not a really great campaign. It's an exceptionally frustrating one. Hard, I would not call it that. A campaign where you can take on Durfu, Orion, and the other two minor factions in Alphalore very damn quickly, and where you're stronger than Ikeclaw and Scrag combined, that is not a hard campaign. You do have to manage your economy, but you can. There are quest battles, there's region trading available. You can play this campaign and ignore region trading, sure, But I think that doing so is just a ridiculous, nonsensical perspective. It is a core part of the game, whether or not some people like it or not. So, that's what I would have to say on that subject. And Mogar, for whatever reason, decided to go over here. Let's move on to the number one choice. And at number one, it is Kislev. Not just Tsarina Katrin, which I'm showing over here, but Kislev as a whole, as a race. Ostankia's starting position just doesn't make sense, and her campaign mechanics, well, let's just say there's a reason why this campaign is not popular, because having to start every single turn and pressing button to get resources so you can unlock new top bar mechanics is not the greatest mechanic rate of assembly ever implemented in their game. Compared to, say, Grom's cooking, which actually is a really fun mechanic, though we can talk about Grom's campaign and the limitations there, but Grom's campaign suffers from climate limitations, but is not on this list for a reason. But Kislev, man, between the invocation system, the supporter system, the devotion system, their poor economy, it is a really, really maddening experience to play Kislev. I mean, you can be extremely powerful, like trade this region, the initial one you start with as Katrin, get a lot of money, do a bunch of region trading, get 200 supporters by turn 10 or something along those lines. That is ridiculously strong. I don't deny that. It is incredibly powerful, it does work, it gets the job done. But, is that really a great campaign experience? Is that really what the game should be about? And you might say, well, other races can do it, or you shouldn't do it. Well, to that I would reply, yes, other races can do it. Other races don't need to do it. Malakai's campaign, who in a lot of ways is actually harder than what Katrin has to deal with, for instance, doesn't require you to do that. You could do it to abuse things to make your situation impregnable to get truckloads of money, but do you need to do it? Well, I've played Malakai's campaign a lot of times, and I can tell you that not once did I even necessarily think about going that far. I've region traded, to be sure, in every campaign I've played, because it is a powerful mechanic, it is a core part of the game. But feeling like you have to do it or you're losing out in a significant fashion is not a great experience. Also, we can talk about how Kastalta and Katrin have less interesting campaigns because they don't have Wasteland as a suitable climate again. Climate change mod enabled here, I just forgot to turn it off. I do a bunch of testing or play campaigns in my own time, and yeah, climate is just one of those things I wish CA did improve. But because they don't have Wasteland, then Ostankia and Borisurs especially have better campaigns because, well, you can take Zarnagrund as Borisurs and make it your capital. You can't quite do that when you're playing Katrin and Kastalta. Not in the same way, at the very least. So frustration upon frustration. When Immortal Empires came out, it became very clear that one of the best things you could do in a Kislev campaign was not be the Shield of North. It was to conquer the Empire. Now, Norska has been made a lot more viable as a climate, largely because of Malakai's campaign, largely because they wanted to make Malakai's campaign more viable, and that did indirectly benefit Kislev. Because by removing the Cast Wasteland from Norska, that ended up being a much better situation for Kislev to deal with. It just shows how climate can play a major role in a campaign. If you don't engage with these systems, if you don't use the load save character system, if you're not abusing X, Y, and Z, you're just going to fall behind by a fairly significant margin compared to other campaigns on Legendary Lords. And that is a huge source of frustration when playing Kislev. What's also more frustrating is Kislev does actually have a good unit roster, though apparently from multiplayer tournaments, what I've been told from people who are really interested in that side of things, Kislev is actually banned in a lot of multiplayer tournaments because their units are so broken, the unbreakable part, or not really unbreakable, but having units that are in a very difficult fashion, but not having the downside of unbreakable actually makes Kislev's roster ridiculously strong in a lot of ways. So there's even roster issues with Kislev, or balancing issues with Kislev from an army perspective. But the army works well in a campaign. You have replenishment, you have good magic, but getting access to that requires money. And your economy is not worth development, given the pacing of campaign, etc. So if you want to be strong, if you want to succeed in your campaign, and not spend 60 turns just to get your short campaign victory conditions as Katrin or Castalton, be prepared to abuse these campaign systems to get 600 supporters. Otherwise, it might take you longer to get those 600 supporters than it would take you to do your long campaign victory conditions. And that's just not really great. Not horrible campaign, not necessarily the most difficult campaigns, but absolutely maddening to play Kislev at the moment. Especially the more you play him, because I've played a lot of Kislev. The more you play Kislev, the more you realize that doing these things is absolutely the best way to play Kislev. And I just don't think that's a great dynamic. Kostin, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications.